Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Diane Fleet. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and we will start with a roll call.
All right. Joy Andrade is excused. Amanda Bryant. Present. Chris Clark. Bruce Davis.
Present.
Diane Fleet.
Present.
Janice James is excused. T.C. Johnson. Billy Love.
Present.
Bo Revlett. Liz Sheehan.
Here.
Alicia Stowe Branham. And Lola Stowe.
Present.
All right.
Could you all take a second and we'll do an approval of the minutes? So if you'd want to review, I think they were in your email.
Any corrections or edits?
Could I have a motion to approve?
I move approval of May 8th meeting minutes.
I always look to Bruce.
Thank you.
Any seconds? All those who approve?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are passed. Next on the agenda is a public and partner comments. Public and partner comments for issues on the agenda.
I'll also make a reminder here that we do have on the agenda today an update to our encampment SOP, and we did not have that in time to bring it to the advocacy committee meeting where we would normally do work with our membership on that. So knowing that we've not had a chance for the membership to comment, this would be an appropriate time for you, since that is an issue before the board today, if you had comments, questions, or concerns. All right. If there is no comment for issues on the agenda, we would typically go to our Data and Systems Integration Committee report. You may have seen via email, we did not actually hold a Data and Systems Integration Committee meeting in June due to an issue with scheduling. The library did not have a space for us, and we did not have the ability to relocate somewhere and hold the meeting within the allotted time. With no urgent items to be passed at that meeting, we went ahead and just elected that we would meet next time. So that's going to bring us to the Program Performance and Evaluation Committee report with Chair Liz Sheehan.
Hi. We were able to have a space at Eastside Library. We met on June 12th at 1:30. We started with our welcome and introductions and then approved the meeting minutes for the April 17th meeting. And then we had our program reviews. We heard from the Hope Center for the Men's Emergency Shelter and their street outreach program. Every group presents their information and efficacy kind of metrics, and then we have some discussion. So for the men's shelter, we discussed some of the data challenges that aren't unique to the Hope Center, but still, like, we're all kind of, one of the pieces was kind of how difficult it is to track people as they move through different locations. And so we had discussed that as part of their data presentation, but then also discussed how that is a challenge everyone is facing. We also discussed with that program the rules about when people exit and how they come back with or without restrictions. And the answer was you can go back and forth, but there are no restrictions when you come back. And then we talked about some of the other data, like the number of stayers and how that had increased, and some of the lessons learned from the winter shelter was also a part of that discussion. For street outreach, some of the discussion was around youth services and their reach within the younger demographic. And then there were some questions about also exits from that program, particularly to sober living houses. Then we also heard from Bluegrass Care Navigators on the medical respite program. Some of the discussion for that program was around also needing a psychiatric respite program, that might be helpful for our community. And then we talked about a lot of the positive outcomes they had for their short-term program. And then like what the main focus is for the clients there, what type of care they need, and how referrals are handled for that particular program. And then our last presentation was the COC planning grant. So we talked about what that covers, like Marissa's salary, and all of the training and coordination with KHS and the data quality increases we've had as a result of all of the work within this planning grant. And we had some discussion about the like end user group for like trainings, and then what feedback they might be looking for future trainings. And then we had a little bit of discussion about whether there was any other data that people want to see in the coordinated entry reports. And then the last point that I'll make is we discussed how for data quality, review of your data earlier in the year is really helpful as we're kind of doing these reports, that, you know, the earlier the review, the better. We had a time for public comments, and then we adjourned. Our next meeting is August 21st at 1:30 at the Eastside Branch Library. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
If there's no questions, then we'll move on to the next committee, which is Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee with Bo Revlett.
Great. So we met on June 26th. The biggest chunk of the meeting was a homeless and housing roundtable facilitated by George Eklund from Louisville Coalition for the Homeless and Adrian Bush from Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky. I won't try to reproduce that entire discussion because we talked for about 40 minutes, but the outline of it was that they gave a report on kind of the housing scene in Kentucky. They talked about the housing gap analysis that was recently done by Bowen at the state level, and then they gave a legislative update on the things that happened in this last legislative session, and then we did a brainstorm of what our COC's policy priorities would be going into the future, and they were going to do the same thing with folks in COCs and service providers in other parts of the state to try to get a comprehensive statewide set of priorities. And after the roundtable, we got an update on the Common Assessment tool. We are close to implementation with a new Common Assessment tool, and we had a lived experience engagement meeting to get input from folks with lived experience on what the updated Common Assessment tool should look like. The tool has also been sent to Kentucky Fair Housing, and Marissa urged folks to come to the next data and systems integration meeting because that's when we're going to be taking a closer look at the Common Assessment tool. When's that next meeting?
So that would be the first Wednesday in August, so that would be the 7th.
Great. So after that, we talked about National Homeless Persons Memorial Day, which we did last year, and then we took volunteers for folks who want to participate in planning for that again this year. If there's anyone who is not at the advocacy meeting but who wants to participate in that, please find Jeff after this meeting. And then we got an update from Marissa on lived experience engagement. As I mentioned, the last lived experience engagement meeting was about the Common Assessment tool, and we don't have a date for the next meeting for lived experience engagement, and that is because we're waiting for the NOFO to do that. So, and then last we had updates on program standards. We have updated and approved program standards for all program types, which is very exciting. So thank you to everyone for all of your work on this. And we talked about some updates to street outreach standards, made some changes to strengthen language around engaging people with lived experience and peer support, and then took out some specific criteria and standards around encampments. And this is related to HB5, and I know we're going to have a discussion of the SOP for street encampments later today, but that was why that change was made. And the new street outreach standards are up for a board vote today, but they were approved by the advocacy committee. And that is my report, and I think we need to vote on the street outreach standards.
Yeah, we'll have 2 items that we'll need to vote on. One is a review calendar for program standards for 24-25. As we've talked about in the past, we like to review those with the groups at least once annually so we can make sure that what we are doing in practice matches our written policies, and make sure that we are identifying any needed changes like incorporating new best practices. So that motion would have come from membership. Would there be a second from the board on the 24-25 program standards review calendar? All right, thank you, Bruce. Any questions or discussion involving the calendar? Yep, yep. Any questions? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Then we would additionally have the update to street outreach standards document. That motion also would have come from committee, so we would need a second from the board.
Second.
Thank you, Liz Sheehan seconds. And any questions or discussion regarding the updated street outreach standards? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. All right, moving right along. Not only are we a small group today, but we're breezing through.
I have one question
Yeah.
on the report now. Do you remind me of the date of the memorial?
Yeah. December 21st is typically the day. We are going to go ahead and initiate an email within the next week or so to start looking at dates for a meeting. So we'll send out a doodle poll and get the first meeting on the calendar here shortly, so we have a couple months of planning. Any other questions about the advocacy committee before we move on?
Yeah, speaking of the Memorial Day, does the board, I don't recall from last year, does the board need to take any action to not necessarily approve it, but to support it, endorse it, or whatever the appropriate term would be?
We'll definitely welcome any board members that want to participate in the service, and we'll probably have opportunities if anybody wants to help with organizing. Definitely they can participate in those meetings. I know sometimes we identify some items that might need to be purchased or donated to the event, but I don't think we have any actual formal approval at this stage. All right, moving to our encampment SOPs and review report. The first item is going to be actually the update to the SOP itself. So to give a little bit of context on this, you'll have a version in your packet that is done in track changes, so you would see where edits have been made. Initially, upon the passing of House Bill 5, our original conversation with the law department was that they believed that we were going to have to probably do away with a lot of our process. The primary concern being that that bill carries language that we cannot prevent the enforcement as a local government of that law. And so taking a deeper look at that, one of the concerns was where our SOP originally contained certain timeframes that we would offer notices at different stages, such as providing at least a minimum of 5 days on initial notice towards engagement, and then on a final notice providing at least 72 hours advance notice. The concern was that having a specified number of days within a document that is approved by a government board could potentially be constituted as preventing the enforcement. And so initially thought that we were going to have to scrap the policy altogether. However, additional discussions continued. We've also consulted with the Kentucky League of Cities as well as the City of Louisville. And looking more closely, there's also some language in that bill that gives us some flexibility, we believe, in terms of things like limitations on our resources. It does allow us to operate some diversion programming. So in general, the law department has given me consent to go ahead and move forward with carrying out our SOP process as it originally existed. The main change is going to be modifying what is written in this document. You're going to see the primary changes are going to be taking out the specified number of days and moving to language that would say a reasonable amount of time. This is to make sure that we are not seen as preventing enforcement, but still trying to allow us that opportunity to connect persons with services, to still post notices and give advance notice. We're just not going to be within this document carrying a set number of days that would be provided. My office will continue to operate to the extent that we are able with the timeframes that we originally carried in this document, but just making sure that, again, we are not seen as prohibiting enforcement. But since this is the first time that this document in this form has come before the board, I'm definitely open for any questions or comments, concerns before we get to the point of trying to take a motion. Any questions?
I could make just a quick comment. I don't have a question. I have looked at the language. So I appreciate you working with all of the partners who need to kind of have a voice in this locally to identify ways that we can continue our practices but still being within the limits of the law. So thank you for your work on this. I know it's a difficult thing, and I think a lot of people aren't happy about having to do it, but I appreciate you putting the time in to kind of make sure that we're within compliance, but still allowing us to be compassionate.
Thank you. Yeah, that's our aim, and we fully anticipate that, we may bring this document back to you all. We think we'll know a lot more in the coming months about what this looks like in practice. Obviously our police department doesn't have a desire to criminalize homelessness, but I'm sure that they're going to face, some things like calls from citizens, and I'm sure that, we're going to have the state looking at what's going on in communities, and, I don't know with certainty that we won't have to come back with additional edits. But right now, like you said, we're trying to continue the process and find a middle ground. Any other questions or comments on the draft?
I'll just say, just in the very first purpose,
I think you might need to press down on the base right here.
Yeah, I'm like, I
There
don't
you
think it's
go.
working. Okay, there it is. Just under the purpose, offering, where you added offering services in lieu of citation or arrest, that's, that sounds very positive. That sounds kind of like, not enforcing the arrest or citation. So what would that look like, I guess?
I mean, essentially, it's going to be very similar to what we are already doing.
Okay.
Now, we know that as we find out how this unfolds, that there may be a need for us to potentially add additional services, but we're going to start with trying to operate with the street outreach services that we're currently offering, Hope Center's outreach team being the one that is contractually obligated to provide those services. And that specific language was to lean into the language within the bill that gave us the flexibility to have such a process from law standpoint. So they're kind of just explicitly making that connection that this is our attempt to divert away from arrest through the provision of service. Like one thing that my office is going to review is, like, for example, if there are situations that arise where we see that maybe it does result in an arrest, if we need to work with the outreach team to either find additional strategies for storing belongings, if we might need to contract a different service to supplement that might be able to help with retrieving and storing belongings, but essentially not wanting to go ahead and obligate the dollars if we don't know that there is a need for that. We don't want to, like, for example, go out and rent a large storage facility and find out that it's a very non-issue. All right. If there's no other questions or comments, we would need both a motion and a second for this item since it did not go through committee.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion for approval of the revised operating procedures.
All right, that's a motion from Lola and a second from Bruce. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes. Next, we'll go on to our encampment report. This will cover all cleanup since the time that we last met. That was also included in your packet. All right. So this report includes 5 different locations and cleanups. The first of which was the Versailles Road Ravine. This is a location that you would have seen in previous encampment reports. It is technically a private property, but it's a little bit unique in that the portion of land where we typically have issues, even though it's technically privately owned, that private owner is on the other side of the ravine. And so Environmental Services has kind of largely taken on cleanups associated with this location because they kind of understand the private property owner maybe not seeing that as their obligation. We have not, to my knowledge, definitely not in the time that I've been in my role, had any true encampments in that area. It tends to be an area where we might occasionally see rough sleeping or just folks hanging out. So it accumulates trash and debris that we just about once a quarter or so go in and clean. So this was not one that I received an official notice from. It's just a spot that Environmental Services keeps an eye on and cleans as needed. If they do find any persons, they're quick to reach out to us and offer opportunities for outreach to engage. They did not find any evidence of anyone actively staying there, so they went ahead and scheduled that, and it was removed on 5/1 at a cost of $1,500. Next, we had the Virginia Avenue Bridge. This is a designated emphasis area, also just a routine cleanup. Emphasis areas we have within our policies designated as areas with high probabilities of camps returning, and we are not obligated to give advance notice for clearing of those, although we typically try, if there is any indication that someone is staying there, to still give time for outreach to make make attempts and engage. In this case, there was no one identified as actively staying there, and that was also removed on 5/1 at a cost of $1,100. The next location was the Sarin Drive Man of War Bridge. This is our most recently designated emphasis area after several cleanups earlier in the fiscal year. That did not have anyone that was actively staying there. There was no official notice to my office. A routine cleanup of this emphasis area also occurring on 5/1 at a cost of $1,000. The next item that we had was going to be a location at Green Tree and Willowwood Roads. Environmental Services notified my office on May 30th, and this was a location that we had cleaned earlier in the year. It had been a little bit of a delay on the initial cleanup due to some of the other duties that Environmental Services had, but they completed an initial cleanup, and then they noticed some items that were still remaining. Just as a safeguard, they went ahead and notified me in outreach. Outreach made an attempt at contact, determined that there was no one staying there actively, that it was just debris that had been missed in the March cleanup. So that was scheduled to be removed, and that took place on June 3rd at a cost of $80. Probably the cheapest cleanup I've ever done. And then our last location would have been the Oliver Lewis emphasis area. Under that bridge, we had notice from code enforcement on June 3rd of potentially having some persons staying there. Contact was made the next day with one individual who declined services. They went ahead and still made sure that he was aware of the designation of the emphasis area and what that meant. They did a follow-up contact the next day. That individual was there, but in the process of moving along, expressing intent to relocate. And then we did a final check at the time of scheduled removal, which was June 7th. Nobody was present at that time, and there was a cleanup costing $500. The summary for this report, we did have the 5 locations and 5 cleanups. I did make a note here that none of these 5 locations were unique other than within this particular report. We had cleaned these earlier in the year, most of them being emphasis areas that we routinely clean. So they don't actually constitute overall unique locations for the fiscal year. Within this period, our total costs were $4,180. Averaging those out over the 5 locations would come to an average cleanup cost of $836. Of these locations, we had 2 where there was no contact and no active camp, as well as 3 that were designated as emphasis areas. Contact was made with only 1 individual, and that individual declined services. Overall, for fiscal year 24, we cleaned 17 unique locations with 23 cleanups. The overall cost was $47,625 with an average cleanup cost of $2,070.65. About 9 of those locations involved no contact, no active camp. And then there were 6 emphasis areas that were involved with 14 cleanups. There were a total of 9 locations where contact was made, with 17 persons being contacted, 6 engaged in services, and 11 declined. I can also report that in some of the conversations that we had with Louisville in relation to our SOPs and House Bill 5, they have only very recently started tracking data related to their encampments, and I'm a little bit jealous that they have like an entire, probably like 10-person team that handles their encampment efforts. And they also have very similar rates in terms of level of engagement. Probably about 75% of their efforts result in no services accepted. So I know that we've had some conversations just within our group about that rate. And so now that I have another community right here in our area to kind of compare that to, I'll be keeping an eye on their data, and we'll be sharing information. We're planning to meet probably about once a quarter or so just to go ahead and help each other navigate the implementation of House Bill 5. But I think that's a good way to kind of help and understand that despite the best efforts of street outreach, oftentimes we are still going to have folks that may decline just because they know that the removal is ultimately pending, and may elect to relocate instead of engage. Any questions about the encampment report?
I do.
You,
Or did you have a question?
I do, but go.
Okay. Oh, I don't know. Can you just remind me what goes into the usual cost of a cleanup?
So we don't have any internal party that would clear encampments. A lot of that's going to have to do with liability, things that come with some of the encampments that we see. Like, for example, people might be cleaning up syringes. They may be cleaning up other hazardous materials, bio-waste. And so, as such, we typically contract that out. We have a handful of contractors that are willing to complete that work. They're usually very good about being available to us and reasonable with their cost. Typically, we're going to see a lot of trash and debris, such as cardboard, if anybody might have been potentially sleeping on it. We're going to find a lot of food and drink wrappers. There is going to be times when there is bio-waste, syringes. We also find a lot of shopping carts that we have to get removed. Sometimes there are other things. We've oftentimes find people bringing into encampments items that they might be trying to do something with, like maybe they're collecting items that they intend to try to scrap metal. And so we'll see items that have been dragged back into the encampment and then are essentially left behind. And then we see a lot of things like discarded tents that might be damaged in some way and left behind, clothing. There's a lot of different items that we see. Typically, I'm going to get a summary that's going to come in terms of the number of bags or the pounds of items that were removed. And those costs are usually going to be at least a few $100s if there's any significant accumulation of trash. I would say kind of a lower end typical camp is probably about $500. To something that's a little bit more extensive, where someone's maybe tried to build a structure or has had a high volume of trash accumulated, that might be something that's going to cost us a couple thousand.
Great. And so then is the cost for the labor of the contractors, or?
It's for the labor of the contractors, yeah.
Thank you.
So I was just curious, I don't know if conversations have happened, but I saw the Oliver Lewis, and so I know with Town Branch expansion, and I know there's the amphitheater that's going to go right there, and Salvation Army, and I liked your language a second ago when you were talking about compassion. So I just didn't know if there'd been any talk about when this park opens, is there going to be a real push kind of moving folks out of there, or is there conversations to be a little bit more compassionate? Because I think that might be a space where people congregate, and I think we should do that with some care. That's my question.
Yeah. So we will be willing to offer support as much as it's desired. However, that park is actually going to be privately operated. It's not going to be operated by LFUCG. So as such, it would not fall under our SOP process. So to some extent, it's going to depend on the extent to which their leadership would desire to work with us with outreach in our process. Other questions? hearing none, I'm going to move on because I'm still next on the agenda with the OHBI Director's Report. We'll start with an update of the budget. So at this time, you'll finally see that our fiscal year 22 ARPA budget was not present in the packet. We fully expended those dollars. So we are in the process of closing out a very nominal amount on fiscal year 23. All projects funded under our 23 ARPA funds have come to a close. We had a minor balance of $598 that was remaining from our HMIS subsidy. We funneled that into state ID assistance. You can see that movement through the highlighted cells in the table. And right now we have about $360.50 that is remaining. For fiscal year 24 ARPA, this is largely in addition to our HMIS subsidy and Street Outreach 3.0. The majority of these funds were used towards our winter response. We're in the process of final invoicing and closeout of purchase orders from those. So this number may potentially change some, but at the moment we have about $79,488 in ARPA funds that are remaining, and we will be looking to try to get those under contract very soon. We also received a large amount of funding in fiscal year 24 from the general fund. That involved the $750,000 increase taking place in 24, even though it doesn't officially start until 25. They, from the fund balance, went ahead and gave us the additional funds to bring us to that value. We also had $200,000 that was given for a shelter feasibility study that also came out of the fund balance. And so I have included a couple of the projects that we have funded. We went ahead and funded with those general fund dollars. Not sure if we would need additional of our ARPA dollars for winter response. That would have been the landlord partnership program with Lexington Housing Authority, which went under contract approximately July 1. And the intensive case management program with Independence Place that went under contract approximately June 1st. So right now we have a remaining balance just over $750,000, but that includes some things like rolling balance of the fund from previous years, the additional money given to us through the fund balance, and a lot of funds that we didn't necessarily anticipate having in this budget. Then I've also included our fiscal year 25 budget. This is the first year that we rolled off of ARPA and folded back onto the general fund. At the current time, we have funds put aside for the COC planning grant match that is slightly higher than our annual amount in the past due to getting an increase in our COC funding. We are in the process right now of paying our HMIS subsidy for this year. We will be renewing Street Outreach at the same cost of $300,000 for the coming year. And then anticipating the renewal of both the intensive case management and the landlord partnership program, that would bring us down to $677,795 for fiscal year 25. So roughly what you'll see between our 24 and 25 general fund dollars is that after everything that is currently being funded, we have an amount that is going to be roughly equivalent to the $1.4 million that we received for fiscal year 25. It's just spread across 2 years as I was trying to save some of our ARPA funds for winter, utilize the additional funds that we had available. So now as we start this new fiscal year. We've had a lot of items that have had to go through council recently that included the Independence Place and the Housing Authority programs, as well as all of our ESR agreements. So there will be some additional RFPs coming from the OHPI very soon so that we can go ahead and get these funds under contract. And then there was also the budget for the winter shelter from this past year. There was a balance on the general fund dollars of about $314,963. We're just doing some final site restoration right now, and then we'll be closing that purchase order as well. I don't anticipate that with the increase of funding that we've received, that any of that that's left over would come back to us. It's probably just going to return to the general fund. Any questions regarding the budget update? And while you think about that, I'm going to get some water. It's a lot of talking.
Always good to have more money than you anticipated.
This is a very new problem for me to have. I'm excited to have it and to solve it. All right, if there's no questions on the budget, then the only other thing that I wanted to include in my report for this month's meeting is just a kind of update about where we are at with the fiscal year 24 Continuum of Care program competition. Many of you are going to be familiar with the fact that that is our largest source of federal funds for housing and supportive service programs. At the current time, we bring in around $2.4 million annually through that source. And this office is the lead agency for the Continuum of Care and also the collaborative applicant. So we'll be starting very soon the process of authoring the community application and running our local competition. I point this out for a couple of reasons. I want our board as well as our membership to be aware of kind of where we are at. Typically, this process involves certain highlights that we need to hit. We will have deadlines that are established for when our local competition has to be closed and announcements made. We have timelines that we have to have our entire collaborative application available to the public. And then they'll give us an overall due date, and we have to make sure that all of those timelines fit within all of their different rules about there being this many days between this and this. And sometimes it's not a lot of time. Sometimes it's a narrow window. I think the last competition we talked about was maybe roughly 60 days, maybe just under. And so there's a lot that has to go on during that time frame. And in order for us to reach all of those deadlines, there is a possibility that if it doesn't work with our normal meeting schedule, I may need to call a special meeting of the board or of the membership in order for us to approve certain documents and meet all requirements. I can definitely say that it is unique in that we do not yet have a NOFO from HUD. Typically, we would have seen a release of the NOFO by this time. We are definitely behind. Normally, there is something called the grant inventory worksheet, which is related to our renewals that would go out to communities so they can verify all of the amounts are correct for renewing existing projects. And that would usually take place in May. We did not receive the grant inventory worksheet until the end of June, and it is due to HUD today. So that indicates to me that we're probably somewhere in the ballpark of a month and a half, 2 months behind our normal process. And I'm not going to anticipate seeing a NOFO probably until closer to the end of July, beginning of August. So we'll probably be extending the overall time frame, and usually our application would be due to HUD in September. I've seen as late as October. I definitely think we'll be going into October, potentially even later than we did during the pandemic. So again, I put that on people's radars for a couple of reasons. Just be aware we might need to ask some additional requests of your time. And to our providers, we are using this extra time to try to make sure that we are helping you to prepare for the competition. So we recently held a webinar for anybody that has an interest in applying to understand some of our priorities, what our local process looks like. That webinar was attended by, I want to say, almost 30 organizations. So definitely encouraged to see a lot of interest both from returning applicants and potential new applicants. We're going to continue those efforts as we go further into the competition. We will definitely be planning a session to help people navigate the eSNAP system, which is not the easiest or most user-friendly to navigate. And then once we have a NOFO, we'll do some additional technical assistance that is going to be more specific to what our priorities for this round of funding are going to be, and helping people understand how to develop their application, how to consider scoring and ranking criteria, and just put forth the best application that they can. We also have already done a review with all of our renewal applicants to review their HMIS data from the most recent year. And that way we can be identifying anything that might be related to something like a data entry error or a report defect, so that when we do get to the point of the competition, when we score and assess on any of that performance data generated through HMIS, we have confidence that it is actually assessing performance and not something else. Any questions related to the COC competition?
Do we know why HUD is behind?
I don't. I think that there was some decisions that had to be made, some votes related to funding and what the overall pot of money for the competition will be. I know that we have consistently gotten reports from our local field office of them being understaffed, and I suspect that that's probably not unique to our region. And I can tell you also that the version of the grant inventory worksheet that we received was not HUD's best work. So again, it looks to me like a situation of not having enough capacity and scrambling to get things through. Beyond that, we haven't really been given any official explanation. The good thing is that anything that is going under contract this calendar year was already in the last competition. But you know, for projects that would have, you know, something like a March, April renewal date, I kind of hate that for those providers, because they're only going to have a couple of months to really know whether they have funding for an additional year or not. Obviously, we want to do everything that we can to support our partners in planning, making sure that they have every opportunity to put forth a good renewal application. And we'll also lend support to anybody new that's interested in coming into the competition. We're eager to see what bonus funds might potentially be available. There's been DV bonus funds under the last several NOFOs, but you know, that could change. It could be another population or another effort that they choose to focus on. So at this point, we're just hopeful that we will be in a position where we will have enough applicants that if there's anybody who doesn't want to reapply, or there's money that due to performance we would determine needs to be reallocated, that we would have options to reallocate to, and hopefully have partners that would help us to develop applications for any new opportunities that are included. All right. If there's no other questions regarding the director's report, that's going to bring us down to a reminder regarding our next meeting. I intentionally put this in blue, hopefully to make it stand out a little bit, because we are going to be in the council chambers. That's one of the two dates that this room was not available. They have, I believe, a blood drive going on here. So we will be in the council chambers on September 11th at 1:30, and that's at 200 East Main Street. Council chambers is located on the second floor. At this time, is there any comment for other issues or public sharing for issues not on the agenda? Y'all are a chatty group today. One more offer, any announcements or public sharing? And this is open to the membership. All right, hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, move that we adjourn.
I knew I could count on
Yeah,
you,
thank you.
Bruce.
You all woke me up. Yeah.
We are adjourned at 2:27 p.m. Thank you all.